This is a guitarist, Denis Taaffe, and I'm in my home studio, and really today I'd like to discuss the making of my 24th album, Modern Rock Guitar Volume 24, Go For It. And it's been newly reissued here in 2018, January. And it's actually was originally released in 2006. And it was actually the 9th album that I released in 2006. In 2006, I think I ended up doing 75 albums. So that was definitely the most albums that I had done in any one year, was actually 2006. Newly reissued, I've seen release dates of 2003, 2009. Amazon, I think, has 2010 and so on. Incorrect. The actual release is 9th album of 2006. So probably done between January and March of 2006. And, well, let's take a look at the cover first. Chuck Darrell, a friend of mine, would supply me with photos to do most covers. In this particular one, though, he hadn't started doing that. And so this is actually just a photo that I ran across on a royalty-free public domain images site. Images you could use for free, legally, which is what I did here. And it's a sports car, of course, and it's called Go For It. Now that may not seem to have much meaning, but for me at the time, there are some very specific reasons why it's called Go For It. Okay. One, I had really just started creating a lot of albums, you know, just for my own enjoyment, to enjoy listening to them and so on, and creating new material and those kinds of things. And so this was one of them, and so that's one of the reasons why it says Go For It. There's nothing holding me back from doing more albums, prior to that. For example, in 1999, when I released my debut album, my first album, my second album didn't come until a year later. I just didn't even realize I could make more albums. So this was when I was just beginning to really set off on creating a lot of albums. And like I said, in that year, I think I did 75 albums. There's quite a bit. There's another reason why it's called Go For It, and this will become quite apparent. And one of those things is that prior to this album, I had been using drum machines. And in fact, not only that, trying to use several drum machines mixed together to try to create a realistic drum sound. And back then the technology, wasn't quite up to snuff, so it lacked a lot to be desired. The drum machines just didn't sound like realistic drums. And yet I had the Alesis SR16. I think that's, or is it the H? Yeah, I think SR16. And it was great for the drum patterns and so on, but the drum sound just didn't quite capture it. Though I did use it for my entire very first album in 1999. But here, by this time, I was using that drum machine, but I had just... Oh, and I used to mix it with a Zoom drum machine, which had better cymbals. Unfortunately, the mixing of those two really created a wash of drums, if you like, and you'll hear some of that. Not very defined, and certainly not realistic sounding. Now, what is important about this album for me, out of the Modern Rock Guitar series, is that this is the album where I just started to use actual drum samples. And this was a big deal for me. Finally, realistic sounding drums. They're basically, samples, just a loop of pre-recorded audio, really. Very small. And you loop them together. Well, in this case, they were actual recordings of drums being played. And so it gave me a much more realistic sound. And in fact, one of the tracks is called "Go For It," and you'll hear why. In fact, let's begin with the very first track, called "On the Line." Okay, probably stolen from the Triumph track, "Lay It On the Line." But in any case, it's called "On the Line." However, the very first thing you'll notice is, you'll hear the old drums. In other words, the drum machine drums. And then just when you think, oh, well, the album, this track is going to be the old drums, over it, I put the actual drum patterns. The drum samples, which sounded much more realistic, and I was really proud. They had drum fills. On those drum machines, the drum fills were just terrible. You want to talk about not realistic sounding. Okay, so that's the first track, "On the Line." We're going to play it here pretty soon. And the other thing to notice is I was very much, and still am, a very big fan of early Tangerine Dream albums, and I feel overall this album is in a way very similar to a Tangerine Dream album. So not in actual notes maybe, but just in spirit and essence, if you like. Okay, the other thing is this album is very long. It's only 10 tracks, it's actually 73 minutes and 50 seconds long. And you have two tracks I see here are almost 12 minutes long each. Right there's 24 minutes. So it's a pretty long album. So we'll go through it here. Not the whole track, but just important parts of the track, so you get an idea of the making of it and what I was thinking. Excuse me. Okay. So The very first track is On the Line. And I know the very first thing you'll hear is the very intro. And I really like it because you'll hear some guitar-based sounds that are swells. It kind of sound like a keyboard, very much sounding like Tangerine Dream. And you'll hear then the old drum pattern, and then right on top of it, the sample drums to say, here's a new era. Because prior to volume 24, in other words, volume 1 to 23, were the old drum machines. So, here we go. So this was really testing the waters with the new drum samples and if they would actually work. So let's take a listen to it. It's called On the Line. Here we go. I'm not sure if this is a sample or guitar. I can't remember. There's the cymbals. Now that's guitar right there. But it sounds like a keyboard. Very nice. Very Tangerine Dream-like, I think. So I was very pleased about that. Okay, now listen closely. You'll hear the old drum machine and then the new drum samples, which sound much better. Okay. Good way to start off the album. This is a good track. There's the old drum machine. Now here comes the new drum samples. And as you can see, the drum samples are featured. Right? I was so pleased to get a realistic drum sound after all this time. And you'll hear that there are some drum fills and that kind of thing. Right there. And I do very much like this track as an intro to the album. So that's the first track anyway. Signaling the new drum sound had arrived, a big improvement from previous albums. And remember, I was just getting into the starting to use the drum samples. And as a result, I did not use them on all tracks, of the album. And now the next track is called Autobahn. For the German highway system, the Autobahn here. And remember, this is very much in the line of thinking anyway, in terms of old Tangerine Dream albums, Kraftwerk, that German kind of band. In fact, I think they had an album or a song called Autobahn. A little hokey, but it was good. Anyway, so here, let's take a listen to that. And I'll have to switch here. Oop. To a different album. Okay, so here's the second one called Autobahn. And I believe that on Autobahn, I'm back to the old drums. Like I said, I just started experimenting with the new drum samples. So this is the old drums. But I think I still like this track very much. Yeah, here. And actually, I'm wrong. It actually does have the new drum samples. Yeah. And you can hear those cymbals. With the old drum machine, you'd get those cymbals, but you wouldn't hear the bass or snare. It was kind of a washy. Yeah, I was very much into using swells at the time. And I'm still using guitar loops. I think much like I do now. I mean, that hasn't really changed. All these tracks are improvised on the spot. Now, I paused that right there. In those days, that was typical for me, doing guitar sweeps and solos and things. I think later on, as my playing matured, and as I got older too, I really started asking myself, adding things like that, is it musical? And a lot of times the truthful answer is no, not really. But at the time I was very much still in a straight ahead rock frame of mind. I think that changed, over time on there. But at the time, I remember, I worked really hard on this soloing and things like that. And it did help me very much develop a sense of timing and rhythm and that kind of thing. And because they were improvised right on the spot, I had to create a melody, on the spot as well. So I would try to do that and then add fills and solos and those kinds of things. Okay, another thing is, as far as the guitar tone goes, you have to remember, 2006, the technology was a little bit limited, especially for amp modeling. And here I was using a Line 6 Pod XT, which is like the original pod, sound-wise. And listening back, it's not a terrible guitar tone, but it's one I don't know, it was fun to play, that's for sure. But I think I could have gotten a better quality tone now than back then. I don't know. But my preferences have changed really over time, because a lot of the soloing things I did, I didn't find them all that musical in the sense that they maybe fit the track, but they weren't very melodic, I guess. And the tone, when I hear it back now, it's not as I imagined it when I played it back then. Anyway, okay, let's finish out this track a little bit. stuff I really like, the guitar playing there and the tones, I think were pretty inventive for being right on the spot, you know. Definitely fit the track well. The other thing to notice is the bass emulation isn't bass at all, it's just guitar dropped an octave, played on guitar, and then looped. You see, and at the time, that was probably the best bass sound I could get. You know, I still do that to this day, even on my later albums. Even, you know, I think the last one I did was 246, volume 246. I'm still emulating bass on guitar, though it sounds, I think, a little more realistic than it did back then. But at the time, that was kind of the best bass sound I could get. Let's hear that a little bit. Guitar lines right there, I'm kind of using swells as well as hammer-ons and pull-offs and things. I like those sounds there. I think they were very good for the time, especially. Okay, well, let's move on. And by the way, the way that they were recorded was just really to, at the time, I think I had 2 tracks of drums, left and right, stereo. Then I had 1 track of bass, emulated bass, and then 2 other tracks were the regular guitar and all the guitar loops, right? And they were all recorded live, so I just play in my studio room, and that's how they could be improvised on the spot, and I would never touch them up afterwards. I mean, no overdubs, you know, after the recording. So they were truly live in the studio, and I'm trying to recall. Yeah, they were live in the studio, and then if I made a wrong note, that was the end. That's the end of the recording. And sometimes, you know, that came very quickly. Other times, I had really, really long tracks, and sometimes I had to cut them in half because they were so long. You know, because you kind of get lost in there. And it was hard picking out what's the best parts and so on. Okay, let's move on to track 3. And track 3 is called Go For It. And that's the name of the album. Now, for Go For It, I actually had the words Go For It at the beginning, and from what I remember, I removed those. So you can still hear some kind of vocals there, but they're not really vocals. They're kind of what's left after you remove the vocals on there, kind of a reverby delay thing. But it used to say Go For It, basically. And again, featuring the sample drums. You know, this was the album that I wanted to make for a long time because of the better drums. You know, and you'll hear that in this Go For It thing. The other thing is, ventured very much into looping the guitar parts and things. So you'll hear it here in this Go For It. And you'll hear how it's a repeating loop of not only the drums, but of the guitar. Okay. And you'll hear it now, and it's the It's the track 3, Go For It. There's the drum samples. That's where the vocals were saying Go For It. Now, a couple of things here. This particular track very much used loops rather than a lot of live playing. And in fact, if you hear the bass is actually a sample of someone playing a bass, right? It was one of these free samples from Sony, very much like the drum samples were. And as time goes on the subsequent albums, I get heavily into using samples and things, and then at some point I said, well, at what point do you differentiate actual playing to having samples play it for you? And so this was kind of an experiment to see what it would sound like, and so I put it on the album. But yeah, if you listen to the drums on it, or the bass, and the drums for that matter, I'm not playing those. Those are samples. So I'm just playing the guitar loop there, and you can hear it here. Again, featuring the drum samples. In fact, there is no bass. So I did remove the bass. That's kind of funny. I removed the bass, but you can hear it at the beginning. Right here. Da-da, da-da. But then, later on, I take the bass out. So, let's see where that goes. Let's move that ahead a little. Yeah, like here, there are no bass sample. Just the drum samples and the guitars. Anyway, so that's Go For It. And you have to remember, I was really, I guess, in a creative move trying to push the album forward. And I had a real vision for the album. This was inspired work, this album. And I had kind of an idea for how I wanted it to sound and things. And I found some albums are just lack that completely. Now whether I was successful or not remains to be seen. Okay, so anyway, that's where I started using the drum samples. Some of the tracks, I resorted back to my drum machines for many reasons. And one of them was that my entire recording setup at the time, was set up that way. I would have had to have changed a lot of things to use drum samples on every track, which I eventually did do, and I abandoned the drum machines. But at the time, I didn't. So this next track is called Matra Simka. And for those who want to know what matrasimka is, it's actually a car. When I was in France, bordering Italy, I would see the sports car driving around. I go, gosh, I've never seen that kind of car. What is that? And it's a matrasimka. And so that's why I named this track. I don't remember much more than that. So let's check it out. Matrasimka, here it is. It's the fourth track. Okay. Okay, now here, back to using the drum machines, and you'll see how the drums are kind of washy, kind of a wash of drums. But I am playing the bass, and then the bass starts looping. And remember, the bass is actually guitar emulating bass on there. So let's take a listen. And you'll hear the guitar part right there is actually a loop of guitar, but it's a very short loop, and so it's repeating quickly. And what that is, it's actually backwards guitar. Guitar, you play it forwards, but it plays backwards. But then you loop that backwards part, and it gives you this kind of repeating thing. I also like the bass pattern is musical to me. Okay, and the real high part is something that I really started using quite heavily, and I still use it to this day after 200 some albums, still using this technique, and it's the swelled guitar notes. And what that means is you play a note, and normally you would hear the guitar pick hitting the string, right? So it goes bam, bam, like that, and you hear the pick. But if you swell the note, you hit the string, right, with the pick, bam, like that. However, you have your volume knob down, so you don't hear the initial pick, and then you swell it in, and it kind of fades in, and very much sounds almost like a keyboard. If you'll hear this on that little melody line. So there I've got two lines. One of them I'm playing live, the other is being looped, trying to harmonize together. I really like the feel of this track overall. Guitar solo, and it's really inspired because I mean, I would just play these one after another and not even remember what I had played in the last track before it, So overall, it comes off of, if I was to name this album, it's being inspired, really. At that point, I think I was trying to be as creative as possible, Okay, anyway, let's move on to track 5. It's called Prototype. I'm not sure what this is. Ah, yes. Yeah, okay, here's Prototype. Same kind of thing. I think it's really inspired playing, creative, I guess, is the best word for it. Guitar, which is doing kind of a feedback kind of thing, emulation of a feedback, if you like. I think what's interesting about this track is, usually in a song or instrumental track, usually they'll switch from chords, really rapidly, like F sharp to D to C to A to F, all kinds of real fast changes in chords. Whereas here, it's actually one chord. And the chord is playing, and my job playing over that is to find different ways of playing over that and having it sound different. In other words, play part of it as a major of that chord or a minor of that chord, if that makes sense, and mixing them up. Whereas it sounds like you're switching chords, but you're really not. Okay, anyway, and it has very much what I described earlier, it has the swells, the guitar swells, it has clean guitar, it has the distorted overtones guitar, which I was probably playing live, and some of them were looped. And the other thing I noticed is that I faded in the drums and the bass, emulated bass, and guitar. And they came in fading in. Alright, so those are the structural elements of this track. Let's hear that again, the beginning. this track is almost 12 minutes long, so I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here. The name of it's a Prototype. Alright, so let's go to 5 minutes in. What's interesting here is that here I have that clean guitar and trying to get a delayed guitar, but back then I couldn't sync the delay times to the music so they wouldn't be in time. But even back then, I do that now. Like the last albums from 200 on, I've done that, using the delays and things. But I realize now that even back then I was trying to do that. Very interesting. Okay, that's 5 minutes in. Let's go a little bit more. Let's go here, see. 9 minutes in. Trying to craft the song to go in a certain direction. Interesting to hear now. Okay, the next one is about, well, it's about 10 minutes and 46 seconds long. It's called Kilometers. Let's hear that one. This track, it really has a sense of direction, you know, which direction it's going in. The other thing is I really like the clean guitar sound itself. Notice, though, it's the old drums. Sad. Forward a bit. Let's see. There we got a combination of clean guitar and backwards guitar being looped. Creates an interesting sound for sure. There's the backwards guitar. Emulated bass pattern, I think, is very interesting. You know, I mean, these are pretty far out experimental guitar sounds. I mean, even for today's standards, you usually don't hear this kind of guitar sounds, It's usually standard guitar. Anyway, so let's move on to track 7. And track 7 is called Rest Area. And it's 12 minutes long as well. I would assume it's probably a more laid back track. Let's find out. Yeah, slower tempo. And the things that sound like keyboards are swelled guitar chords rather than single notes. Better guitar sounds I think I had at the time. And that right there is sounds like a keyboard, but it's actually guitar. Like I said, I swelled the chords instead of notes. Let's move ahead to about a 5-minute mark. See where this thing goes. Big guitar solo. These guitar solos, because they were improvised on the spot, I think one thing I learned from them very much is timing, of having the guitar solo, even when you're going fast, fit the timing of the song, even when you're doing sweep picking, and it's a lot harder than it seems. And the sweep picking I would use. So moving on, number 8, Nitrous. Okay, it makes sense for the car, turbocharged. Alright, so let's check that one out. Now I know what this is. It's called Nitrous, but it's actually a part of an earlier track that we heard that was so long that I had to cut it. And so this is the second part. I didn't want to lose what I had played on it, especially soloing wise. I got to be quite the guitar technician solo wise, you have to remember, that was all the rage too, is playing, fast solos and those kinds of things. I don't think I quite appreciate, guitar solos as much as I did then, anyway. Okay. So anyway, that's what that is. Really a remnant of a longer track that was already on the album. So it's kind of a part 2. And it's 3 minutes long. So kind of an extra, if you like. You know, rather than not putting him in as a big solo, guitar solo. Let's move on to number 9. Numero 9-0. And number 9 is The Bridge Crossing. Why is it called The Bridge Crossing? I have no idea. Sounded cool at the time, or maybe it's a movie I saw or something. You know, a lot of my music is very much influenced by movies. You know. Anyways, The Bridge Crossing. So let's hear it. I like that very much. The keyboards are actually guitar, swelled in chords, and then looped. There's the emulated bass. The drums, I think, it might be a combination of the old drums and drum samples. I'm not quite sure. Oh. Not quite sure what I was thinking there. There we go. Yeah, a lot of times when I'm playing in the beginning, you know, I'm forming ideas of where to take the track, finding different parts and things. I really like the swelled guitar parts here. And for me, it's nice to hear that I wasn't so enthralled with just playing guitar solos, you know. This kind of playing has a lot of merit as well. Probably more so, to me, it's more musical. Yeah, I like this track. The Bridge Crossing indeed. It's about 8 minutes long. Alright, let's speed ahead here. Let's move that ahead a bit. Let's see where it goes. Strange how I'm using harmonics there and they kind of get away from me a little bit. Yeah, see again, guitar solos. I was big into those back then. A lot of my music had guitar solos. In fact, I would do some tracks were for regular music listeners, and then some tracks for guitarists only, really. You know, showing off guitar technique and soloing techniques and things. But I very much like the guitar sounds themselves. Like the distorted guitar, the solo guitar, had a lot of reverb and delay, giving it depth, you know, as if it was far away, which fits the track well. And then the clean guitar. You know, I think I had a very good clean guitar sound back then. Okay. Okay, last track, 8 minutes and 45 seconds. It's called Import Export. Why is it called Import Export? I have no idea. I had something in mind at the time. I don't know what. I just don't remember why it was called Import Export. A lot of times, you know, to name these tracks, they're already recorded. I would look up a theme on like Wikipedia, and it would have related words and things, and I would use those for titles. But I don't see where import-export fits with anything like that. But okay, let's check it out. Last track on the album. It's the old drums, but that's okay. Again, very inspired. You know, this is a lot of times when I would record these tracks, I'd get lost. You know, just playing. So let's hear where this goes. Okay, that's the bad boy of rock guitar solos. Very 80s guitar. And, you know, when you're playing guitar, it's fun. It is. It's fun to play that kind of heavy metal type guitar rhythms, and then adding fills and leads. And, you know, the thing that was the hardest for me was to do that in time. You know, I had terrible timing, and it took a long time to try to get some decent timing where you could do that kind of thing and still be in time with the rest of the track. And I hear it now. It's kind kind of very 80s. I remember playing, I think, a track, and it had that kind of heavy metal guitar thing, and I remember my sister listening to it, and then she would do like a pose, like a cool guitar metal pose, and I hear it now, and I see exactly what she means, how do I describe it? Again, it comes back to, being musical and that kind of thing. But it was also a style of guitar playing. I kind of grew out of it. That's the honest truth about it. I can still play that stuff. That's not the problem. And it's fun. So this was Modern Rock Guitar Volume 24, Go For It. And I really like this album. And I like this album for the reasons I stated. Definitely the drum patterns and all. But I think overall, the thing to get from this is I think my enthusiasm, if you like, for trying to come up with something new, different, creative, and that very much tried to fill my vision of a Tangerine Dream type album. Is very much, you can hear it in the tracks, if you can overlook the drums and some of the solos and so on. I think it's a good album. It really, and I love the idea that it's being reissued. It was available for, I'm not sure exactly how long originally, at least a couple of years, and you could always buy it on Amazon. I think they would put it on a CD for you, but it was like $20. I think it's still $20. But now the album download is like $5 or something. And the nice part about it being reissued is that it's not going anywhere for a long time. It'll be available for a long time, and that was a big deal. What happened was the company who put it out originally stopped dealing with CDs altogether. Unfortunately, they failed to let me know any of that, and all of a sudden, from one day to the next, all my albums unavailable. So here I get a chance to make that right, which is great. And also to revisit these albums, which I haven't done in a long time. And there's some tracks that I really, really like. Or the overall essence of an album I really like, or what I was trying to go for. And I think I achieved some of that anyway. Now do I prefer my new albums? Yes. But for the time and what I had to work with, and here it's really a worthwhile album, certainly. Alright, that's it for Modern Rock Guitar Volume 24. Go for it. Okay, see you next time.